So season 2 kicks off with a very special guest, and that is Melanie Jones. Mel is what we call her, or MJ. So MJ, welcome to the show.
I'd probably get called a lot of other things, Prakash, but we'll stick with those two. They're very nice. Wonderful to be chatting with you.
Parliamentary, aren't they? We'll stay with
And then we'll start there and let's see how we end up at the back end of this conversation.
We're all living in completely unprecedented times, isn't it? I mean, we're hearing about sort of second waves and third waves and what have you.
Yeah.
Tell me how it is really for someone like you, who's otherwise, 9 months, 10 months in a year on planes, different hotel rooms, different cities, and pretty much cooped up, if not in a home, then certainly in the city of Melbourne. Not a bad place to be cooped up, mind you.
No, I tell you what, it's a cracking city. If no one's been here, please do come when we're back out of this space. For me personally, though, to be in Melbourne in a winter, and I'm not a winter girl, is a little bit different, but it's actually nice being at home and actually just having time just to think about things. I think that's what probably everyone, without taking away the enormity of the pandemic and how it's impacting people's health and finances and the like. I think it's a lot of people are actually saying it's actually been nice to have that time just to get rid of the clutter in your mind. And actually, there's probably a number of things that have been probably tapping away at the back of our minds at different stages. We've got time to actually think about it. So that's been quite enjoyable for me because there's so many things, as we've had heaps of chats in the past, which I've absolutely loved. You can actually get a bit down and dirty with those thoughts and wrestle them around a bit, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So now let's sort of talk about this journey, Mel. I mean, obviously there are an increasing number of folks now on both sides of the gender divide, if you will, who've made transitions from their respective sports or even other sports and come into either writing, journalism, commentary, administration, management. But I don't know too many who've actually done more than one or two things. You are now a director on Cricket Australia's board. You have been involved with Victoria Cricket for a while.
Yeah.
You are obviously one of the most sought after broadcasters. Now I hear there are sort of almost bidding competitions in people's mind.
Hardly.
And all of that, was it a conscious transition as you were coming to the end of your playing days? Or is it one of those things that kind of just happened along the way as you went?
Yeah, I was actually chatting to someone the other day, and I think I've got to probably stop saying I've fallen into things as my life has sort of opened up a little bit. Yes, some of it wasn't by design, but I think when you sort of look back at your own journey, there are certain ways in which I think you have a choice about the kind of person you are, the kind of things that you're excited about, how you want to sort of challenge yourself. And I think those sort of choices in my past have probably helped lead me to this position. There was never ever thought that I would ever want to be really a commentator or a broadcaster, because that was never in my forethought whatsoever. Probably because I never thought that, number one, women's cricket would be broadcast so much, and two, that there'd be a space within the men's game as well. So it started purely from the fact that I got dropped from the Australian team. It was early 2000s, got dropped from an Ashes tour to England, naturally gutted, but happened to be over there visiting family and doing a bit of work with Surrey Cricket. And because I was there, they needed a person that knew the Australian women's cricket team. And I've mentioned this story a bit to people, and it was weird because they asked if I wanted to do it, and I just said flat out, no, not a chance. And they're like, I said, well, because I want to be playing in it. I don't want to be sitting there talking about it. Like, that would pain me greatly. And they said, we'll pay you 300 quid. And I said, tell me where, when, and what to wear. And I was like, this is unbelievable. Here's me getting paid to talk on a game that all these women, these magnificent athletes are playing in for their countries, for their nations, and not getting paid a cent. And I just thought that was quite ironic. So I thought, here we go. So I still thank Mark Jennings, who was the Australian selector at the time, for dropping me, because when I look back on it, that was my first little step into the fray of commentary. And it wasn't, to be honest, it wasn't an overly enjoyable one. The guys on that commentary team for Sky at that time, it was almost like a punishment for them to do women's cricket. So I was sort of struggling with it because all of a sudden here's women's cricket on television. This is magnificent, and I wanted to give it all. Yet there was sort of this feeling of resentment in some ways, or not wanting to be there, which has changed dramatically since 2001. And it wasn't the best of games from my memory either. So you're trying to pump it up, but at times it really wasn't that great. So yeah, it was a tough introduction to commentary.
But what about, let's carry on in the same vein, what about management and getting involved with wanting to make a difference in the game and contribute? How did that come about?
Yeah, I'd worked for Cricket Victoria for a number of years, and I'd always wanted to go into high performance and coaching. That was always, while I was still playing, I was a teacher by profession, secondary education and physical education. I love the whole coaching and helping being part of developing a person, whether or not it be them as an athlete or a student. So I always thought coaching was what I wanted to do. And when I got to Cricket Victoria, that was the initial aim. And then as the years went on, I found myself more in game development, sort of working on schools and women's cricket and the like. And it just got to a point where I couldn't see myself getting out of that without a big shift. So I quit. I had no work to go to at all. And I started doing a little bit of work with a health promotion charity called Red Dust, which works with remote Indigenous communities. Started doing a bit of work with them on a media scholarship. And then a good mate of mine ran her own sports management company called Majestic Sports, which looked after female athletes only. She was Alison Cook when she was playing for Australia for basketball, had moved into this area. So I started doing a bit of work with her. And it was shortly after that the company that we sort of went to say we just need a little bit of expertise on the commercial side of things, because things were shifting in that space for women. They bought Majestic out, and we ended up at ESP, which is now TLA, which is Australia's largest sports management company. So they look after, and I ended up in the sort of the international division, looking after a lot of our female athletes, predominantly netball and basketball back in those days. And then we sort of acquired a cricket arm as well. So the likes of Megan Shute and Aaron Finch are now at TLA as well.
Fantastic.
Had no idea what I was doing. None whatsoever, Prakash, as you probably understand.
I mean, if this is the result of doing things that you didn't know what you were doing with, just imagine if you actually knew, wow. I mean, you'd be somewhere.
I know, right? Where would those athletes be now?
I can think of hundreds who'd give an arm and a leg to be where you are, but well done. In this space, and I think that leads me to my next sort of question, which is a topic that's been going on in the fringes, a little more being spoken about now, is this whole idea of male commentators or male experts talking about the women's game and vice versa. Somehow, it was never a problem or was never discussed when guys were talking about the girls' game. It was never an issue. The moment women started coming into the commentary box or the television studios, there were ripples and conversations, maybe quiet ones in the corner about, does she really know? Where do you stand on all this? I mean, I know the principle stand is beyond debate. Anyone who wants to debate that on a principle level, I think, has got their head down in the sand. But from a practical perspective, listener, viewer perspective, what do you think is the value or the uniqueness? Because there is, I think, uniqueness that comes in when you've got a cross-gender commentary team talking about a sport in which one gender is playing. Your thoughts?
Yeah, there's probably two parts there, isn't there? I think the first part is the default mechanism of cricket being a men's sport and a male sport. And it probably has in the sense of the visual perspective of it for, since TV and radio sort of came into fruition. It had always been covering the men's game. Meanwhile, the women have been playing and doing superbly well and learning the game and developing the game and putting their own unique flavour on the game for the exact same amount of time, but it just was never reported on. So when all of a sudden television and radio started broadcasting the women's game and some of the women started then transitioning across, there was this I guess, naivety, on the understanding of the game of the women, because people never saw them playing it. So I think now, hopefully, we've gotten past that point of people's understanding of how we understand the game. It is slightly different, even though we all play the game of cricket. There are some nuances that is slightly different, but I think that is the beauty of where you get that diversity within the broadcast. And that's probably my second point is, last night I was watching the England-West Indies test match, and Ebony Rainford-Brent, who's a good friend of ours, was on comms with Sky Sport. And I've watched her through the first test and the second to watch the BBC, to watch Ali and Ish go about their business as well. But there was, and a little bit is about the other male commentators they've got on the broadcast. There was just a freshness to the broadcast, which I thought was magnificent to listen to, different perspectives. There's the whole Black Lives Matter in and around this space as well, which Ebbs brought a wonderful conversation piece to, along with the likes of Mikey Holding and Ian Bishop. And so all of a sudden then, as just a pure listener and watcher of the game, not as a commentator sitting in my lounge, I'm sitting there and I'm connecting in a whole different way to cricket than I have before, and I've been in it. So then I think about all these other people watching it, whether it's for the first time, the 10th time, or the millionth time. They sit there and I'm hoping that they get a different perspective of the game, which makes them fall in love with it in a completely different way as well. So that's the beauty of it to me, to have diversity in the commentary box.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And tell me, now that there is so much more talk about racism in sport, other kinds of prejudices and so on and so forth, but as a girl growing up in Australia, hugely sport oriented nation, not the couch potatoes, you guys are always out there. You would have had a choice of many different sports. You chose cricket, and we'll talk about why cricket in a minute. But did you face, Mel, as you came up the ranks to be able to don Australia colours, did you face that kind of prejudice or any kind of sort of discrimination in your journey?
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I know a lot of people have asked me that, but they asked me that not in a question as you've just framed it, but in a statement of, oh, well, you wouldn't have faced any racism in Australia. And I'm like, are you asking me or are you telling me? Because it's a weird dichotomy, because I think for some reason, and for people that don't know my background, my mum's white Australian, and my grandparents' background, if you go through the family tree, is Scottish and Welsh. And my dad's from Trinidad in the West Indies. And unfortunately, I don't know family trees other than getting to the West Indies from the slave trade. So that'll be another little journey of mine in the next little bit as well, is to fully understand my dad's side of things. So and the first thing that people see, because we're very visual people, just as humans, is a visual thing. So the first thing that people see is colour in a lot of ways, and which is fine, because I'm very proud of the mix of my heritage. And so, yes, so without a doubt, the thing is, I think people like to think that Australia isn't a racist country, and by and large, it's not, but there is a very strong undercurrent of racism, and I see it and feel it completely different to what my mum does to what everyone else does in the streets as well. So a lot of the racism, there's probably 2 or 3 different types of racism too, if you can say that. One is that sort of unconscious racism, where people don't really realise what they're saying because they haven't had the conversation before. There's the blatant, in-your-face racist comments to you that you cop on the streets and the like. And then there's just that sort of subtle, which Ebbs put beautifully, that just the drip feeding comments all the time, which is a build up over time. And that's why over the last little bit, without really realising it, in terms of the Black Lives Matter, it's been a really draining and emotional time, because you're actually going back over your entire life going, oh, okay, that probably was racist. And you don't really realise at the time, because my mum, she's been gorgeous. She's probably protected me a lot from a lot of racist things as a child. But then as an adult, you grow up and you see things a little bit different. You've got to deal with it yourself. So I've been lucky in that, I shouldn't say lucky. It's been nice to know that within the cricket family, I haven't, and I'm just trying to think out really quickly here. I haven't really felt it that much, but at the same point in time, it's more been from a societal position. But at the same point in time, the position I am now, whether it's, a commentator or a director or just, love of the game, I look at the game and I know that there are things that we need to address very, very quickly for long term.
Oh, absolutely. And what tends to happen is because these are in many ways societal prejudices, as you say, and they've come down from generations for right or wrong reasons. You look at a country like India that you talk about very often in many of your comments about being one of your favorite countries. We probably look at caste in a way as saying that's just a way of life, but caste is very much like race, maybe even worse in some ways. And there used to be a time when that was there. Then you have economic racism as well. In the good old days, you had, if you weren't privileged, you weren't out on a cricket field. And all that is beginning to change. Are you sensing that as the younger generation of sports people, especially in the women's game and everywhere else, are coming to the fore, their willingness to tolerate any of this is becoming shorter and shorter? So they're speaking up. And is that in fact pushing people who might still have those mindsets into a kind of a quieter, more devious maybe method of doing this? Because thoughts don't go away overnight. So you politically correct on the outside, whereas inside you're still harboring different thoughts. And how are we as, just say, cricket lovers around the world and our viewers, I'm sure, going to work towards trying to make this a more enjoyable and a more even space for everybody?
Yeah.
What can we do?
This is, I'm feeling on the hot seat at the moment. This is great. But I love these discussions because I think one of the things that I picked up in that first part of the question was about the different platform that athletes now have. And when I look at, particularly for Black athletes or athletes of colour, is that for a long time, people have loved them playing sport, being musicians, entertaining basically millions and millions of people. And it's almost like you're allowed to do that. We're going to allow you to go onto the cricket field or the football field or onto the stage, and you can entertain us. That's wonderful. We love it. But then all of a sudden, when they start to get a voice and start using their voice, then at times it's a bit of a, oh no, hang on a minute. No, I'm not too sure about this. And this is why I loved Mikey and Ebbs having that stage, because not only were they magnificent athletes and we enjoyed watching them, they now have a really strong voice and a wonderful story and their own truth to tell. So there's that piece that I think people are starting to grapple with a little bit more. And I think people are either open to it or not open to it. And that's probably the second part of your question there, is that the world at the moment, without getting too deep and philosophical about things, is finding space. 100 years ago, it was very easy to understand your identity because you didn't travel too far outside of, if I lived in Melbourne, this was it. I was part of probably a religious group, a church group. I was, and I might have played a little bit of sport, or I just worked. But this was my identity, and it was everyone else around me, and it was really easy. We didn't have social media and the like. And now all of a sudden today is that my identity is, I've already mentioned, my mum's Australian, my dad's from the West Indies, I was born in England, I travel a lot. And then there's all these other layers of who I see as myself. So then to try and figure out identity is really, really tough for a lot of people. And so then they either go one way or the other. And I think that's where we're getting to at the moment. And I think that's why you're either, whether you want to say it's more left or right or this way or that way or whatever it is. And that's probably where a lot of the challenges are that we face, because the more and more we say, I'm this person, someone else says, no, you're not. And then we're not listening to each other. It's probably what I'm trying to get down to as much as possible. And so if we can create a platform of cricket where we can listen to each other a little bit more around Black Lives Matter, I think embrace that as much as we can.